It's strictly taboo.
Welcome to Nothing Venture, Nothing Aim. I'm your host with the most, your DM Jared. And today I'm joined by Steve.
Yep.
So Steve, today we're going to have a quick conversation about sentient magic items, and also in that same vein, and I make a silly face because I'm not 100% sure what to call them, but items that kind of grow with the player, and that also brings in a sense of sentience. And we'll touch base on both those topics. I don't want to just start throwing those out there and having our listeners and viewers being like, why are they just jumping into the conversation? So, Steve, before we jump into this, what are your thoughts on sentient items and items that would like grow with your players?
I remember back in the D&D 3.5 days that there was one splat book that came out with the idea of, and I can't remember what they called it, but I always call it heirloom items, like items that had a story. When you were going through and you were leveling up as a character, these items would grow with you if you knew how to unlock them. So you had to like discover the lore of the history of this item. And then if you met certain requirements, made some checks, you were able to unlock other powers. So I always thought that was a cool idea.
And that kind of ties into the items that grow with the players.
Yeah.
Interesting. I'm on the opposite fence of that, and I'm going to play the person who dislikes it, and I'm the DM making this video. I was the genius who was like, hey, we should make a video about this. I think sentient items should only come into play as kind of a adversarial role or a role of a antagonist. I say that because the only time I ever read about a sentient item was from R.A. Salvatore, the Dritz novels, and the item is called Claw. The actual name, one moment, sorry. Let me bring up the actual name. It's Charon's Claw, and that was a very evil item.
Yeah.
The items drew, it was a cool item. Like every time they swung it, it left a trail of ash behind it, and it was cool. But it also was like trying to take over the person's mind. It was from an old school concept. And when I think of sentient items, that's the item I think of, is the item who's trying to control the player and take over or be the dominant force in that campaign, in that dynamic between player and GM, right? It's kind of weird because the GM, you do have to play a sentient item. Like you have to be like, oh, your item's talking to you or nudging you to do something naughty. You're like, I don't want to do it naughty. And they're like, do it naughty.
I remember that one of my first edition Pathfinder characters had a sentient item, and it was built into the class, which was the Magus. And then the Magus had an archetype called the Black Blade. And then, yeah, the sword could just decide you're not doing what it wants and just try to take you over.
See, again, antagonist or a foe of sort.
So the idea of like the item that grows with you is not necessarily sentient. So that's there's two kind of sides of how you want to build these kind of items. Because if you think about Lord of the Rings, right? Every sword that mattered or every weapon that mattered had a name. And like, oh, well, this ancient king used it. It was passed down and it has these powers. If you just some nobody discover it, you're not going to know all about that. Yeah. So then it takes you time as a player to discover the powers. So it's not really like granting you the powers. It's not actually forcing you to do anything, but it has that item, like that item that there's a lore behind it, and you have to do some work to meet the weapon halfway.
Interesting. So talking about those heirloom items, the items that grow with the player as they adventure forth, slaying goblins by the bucket load. Now, you found that book, Steve. You have it in your possession. And what was the name? The exact name, so our listeners could, if they wanted to look it up. It's from Dungeons and Dragons 3.5 edition, and the name of it was...
The name of the book is Weapons of Legacy.
Awesome. And so talking about the legacy weapons, what could a GM put out there for their players? Is that something you give them early on, or is that something you would want to give them mid-game?
It could be something that they discover like at lowish levels, like, you know, 5th level or something like that. But this something also could be if a player really had this cool idea of that they had like the weapon that they quote unquote bought that with their money, that actually isn't bought, is something that they've inherited or discovered before they became an adventurer.
Oh,
yeah. And if you wanted to add like extra lore to it, and something maybe the player doesn't even know, let them discover it as you go.
I like that concept. A lot of players come in to a game, you know, and they're like, oh, this is my father's great sword, and it's a weapon from my tribe, and I'm a barbarian, you know, and this is the great sword that the leaders carry. And as the players kind of playing, all of a sudden, you know, every time they come in contact, you know, take it from like the Hobbit, right? Every time they come in contact with, let's say, like an evil lizard folk or a serpent folk, it glows green or purple, right? I like purple. So it glows purple. And then the first time it happens, the player's like, why is my sword glowing purple? And, you know, and all of a sudden it's this buildup that it slowly grows, and maybe the sword, and maybe every time they fight like a serpent folk, you know, steal it from Conan, it starts to get stronger, and then maybe it has like, you could give it Medusa powers. That would be pretty cool, right?
Like with armor.
Yeah, that would be fun too. You know, oh, this is my father's knight armor, and you start out as a squire, and then all of a sudden, like the armor is like the Iron Man armor. You could just like whistle or summon it to you, and it just go and attaches on. That'd be pretty badass. Especially if you're playing a campaign long enough where your characters would grow into stuff like that. And
yeah,
it also shows that the DM is kind of taking what you've written down as a backstory. I like that. I like that growth.
The other interesting
concept
thing is if you, as a DM, and you're reading it, let's say you're playing a pre-printed adventure or adventure path, or maybe you come up with your own, and it's a complete homebrew.
Yeah.
And you have this like concept, or maybe there's so you get this idea or something in the module that you go, oh, they never really referenced this, but they mentioned it once. And you can build out an item that's attached to the campaign that they find. It doesn't necessarily have to be attached to a backstory, but it can be attached to the campaign itself.
I like that.
So not sentience per se, but lore. But it's like a lore-based item, but it has powers.
Yeah. Oh, this is a sword that hunts dragons, and it needs to, like, you kill dragons with it, and it gets better at killing dragons.
Yeah. Or
That's
it could be
really
like a named person's armor, and it's like designed to protect its wielder and their allies. And as you like willingly take damage from another player or another character, it like unlocks a power or whatever.
Or something. That would be pretty fun. I think what's really fun is a lot of 5th edition campaigns, Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, stops near 10th, 12th level, right? That's kind of their bracket, and that's fine. And I just finished doing the Curse of Strahd stuff, and in my head, a lot of my players had a ton of fun, and we defeated Strahd, you know, did all the stuff behind it, defeated Strahd, and the player was like, well, I want to loot Strahd's body. Like, This dude's gotta have some really cool stuff. And thinking about it now, giving them Strahd's like sword or like his, maybe his cape is something. And it's like, at first they think it's the cape, like cape of the bat or something. And then it turns out to be like Doctor Strange's cape from the movie.
Oh, nice.
Right? And it has a sentience to it, but it's not sentience where it's trying to overpower you, but it does stuff. Like at night, it gives you the power to talk to wolves, bats, spiders, creepy crawlers, and you get dark vision. Maybe if you have dark vision, it heightens it, or maybe gives you imprecise, like an imprecise tremor sense, because it feels the air, and that would be cool. I feel bad now. Talking to you, I feel bad. I didn't come up with that. I feel bad. I ripped off my players. I'm sorry, guys. I should have done better by you.
On the other side, that cloak, considering the fact that Strahd wore it for so long, that could be a sentient item. And that you put it on and go, oh, I get all these cool powers. I can fly once a day. I can turn into a bat. I could do all this cool stuff. But slowly but surely, if you continue that campaign, that's going to maybe start affecting the player. And then maybe the cloak is talking to them. Yet again, you can pull in sentience to it. For me, having a sentient item, one is to give a player something that's probably too powerful for them, but it has some hidden detriment. Right? That's one way I could see building in a sentient item. The other side of it is making it a core component of the game.
So now moving over to sentient items and kind of moving away from heirloom or legacy items, talking about sentient items, you would suggest, and I agree with that, making it a core component to the game, a la the Lord of the Rings, where the ring was trying to find, the Dark One, or similar to, and Critical Role, Grog's great sword, the
Craven Edge.
Craven Edge. Thank you. It's been a season and Grog didn't know it was stealing his soul, or it had that possibility of stealing its soul. That's something interesting. I know a lot of people place those as cursed items. They'll be like, oh, this sentient item is cursed. And this kind of goes back to the fact that I say sentient items should be more of a antagonist and not a protagonist. I feel like, and this is going to be mean to say, a sentient protagonist item is more of a mascot than it is a useful tool. Or it's almost akin to, in my head, the GM PC.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
Yeah, I feel a sentient item should be a little bit more ruthless. They're stuck in this weapon. Maybe it's demon soul. Maybe it's the user messed up. They were a magic wielder, right? You could give someone a wand, like a wand of magic missile, right? It's in the core rule book and D&D. It's a simple magic item, has so many charges in it. But the first time you use it up and you burn all the charges, maybe they roll and they fail the roll. And instead of it breaking, it gains sentience now. And someone's like, wait, why is my wand telling me, oh, you want more power, don't you? Yes, take it. I think that would be cool. And it's such a low level item, like players don't really think of wands as being a possible sentient item. That would be fun. Maybe that's the end of your last campaign. They have to like contain the soul of this entity, this evil entity. And the player's like, oh, you have to put in a magic item, right? And all the players are like, oh, shoot, like I don't want to give up this really cool sword or this really cool boots, my boots of elven kind. I don't want to give up. And finally someone's like, fine, I got this wand, right? As I hold up my pen.
Level. Just should throw this away.
Yeah, like I don't need this wand anymore. It's a wand of bleh. So take the wand. And when you're building a sentient item, you always want to give them kind of personalities, right? So yeah, it might be the soul or the spirit or the entity of this ancient evil, Mumra, the ever living, you've now jammed into this wand. But you should always give them like a drive or something. And I feel that's kind of important for when you're thinking about sentient items, is to give them a concept that they want. What does this wand want? And it could be anything, like it wants to be free. Okay, but how? How would it make itself free? Is it a jerk, or will it lie? Is it going to tell the players straight out, be like, listen, I could get you a lot of really great magic items, but you gotta set me free. And then the players could be like, sure, or no, that seems like a trap. We're just gonna put you in a box.
Yeah, the other side of intelligent items, when you try to put them down, sometimes they resist.
You would need to make it the center of the game, but also you don't want to lose your game to the item. And that's the most important thing, is the campaign shouldn't be about this item. It should flavor the campaign. Right, Steve?
You can make it the central tension. I think that's a possibility of like your big bad has this item, and that it's causing other items to be like that he or she is given to their like lieutenants. And then it's like spawning more sentient items so they can directly control via like almost like the Emperor Palpatine, using it to control his lesser people, but it also gives them extra powers. So that would be cool. So now the players are finding these intelligent items that maybe mess with them, that maybe they can get some power. Maybe they can try to glean some information from the big bad through the item because there's a connection. You could take it in a bunch of different ways.
I'm gonna have to write down notes on that, because that is now a campaign. I like that a lot. I really like that concept where like they're spawning items, and the items are in like Lord of the Rings, right? The one ring to rule them all. You got the 9 for the humans, it's 7 for the dwarves, and the 3 for the elves. And now you have the one ring, but instead of rings, you have like the one crown, and then the 3, capes for the elves, and the 7, the thunder thrower hammers for the dwarves, right? The Thor hammers, and the 9, long swords for the kings.
Yeah, and not necessarily have to be the big bad trying to corrupt other people. He could also try to be empowering his own troops.
That would be fun. Yeah. I don't stat sentient items. Heirloom items, I would stat, right? If we're talking legacy items, you should stat them out. And you should kind of have, you could give it to your players, right? Like the moment the story starts to come forward, like the moment they've reached a check mark, like be like, okay, you've made that check mark, check it off, and this is what happens. And I think that would be fun for the players. It shows a level of progression beyond their character sheet.
And you can even throw lores as an idea into this, because the original system required you to have some skills, because the idea is your character was researching the history of this item to try to figure out what unlocks it. So as you get to certain levels, you would have to make checks, and you'd have a minimum skill to even be able to use it and unlock those powers without being, because a lot of these items are a mundane magic item, like a +1 sword or +1 crossbow or whatever. And then as you get skills and unlock and hit certain prerequisites, you start unlocking more and more of these crazy powers. So you'd be like, okay, well, that barbarian, he's spending a lot of time looking at ancient lore and song and drink and all this, whatever, however you want to roll with it. And then on the next level, you can say, okay, well, instead of putting that one skill point into this skill that you want to put in, you're going to be putting into the other thing, this lore, which then lets them unlock more of these powers of this item, which goes into all the extra time that this character is putting into trying to unlock this thing.
Interesting. I like that. I think, and again, that goes back to character growth. The character now starts to grow with this heirloom item, and it becomes a central point for their character. It would be terrible for the character to lose that. You know, a lot of people play those characters where this was my father's or my mother's. And I think that would be really cool. And it could be a ring, right? Like there's a ring of,
any item.
You could do anything you want with that. And I think that would be really fun. I like that. I think that you should do stuff like that as a GM. I wouldn't. I mean, you could do it at level 1. You'd start it. You could start the conversation.
Regular sword or whatever it is. And even going back to sentient items, I personally, if it's an item the players aren't expected to use, I can understand it. Like, it is the central tension. So it's not something that they have. It's something that they are either striving to acquire, to either destroy, or to stop the bad guy from having it, or maybe creating it. There's also the other idea of having sentient items as just a crazy thing to throw in your game that doesn't necessarily have to be part of the story, but it's a cool idea you have to give a character some wonky thing, right? So maybe it is more powerful than what the characters would already have at that point, but there's some hidden cost to where, in the case of Craven Edge, that, I mean, from what we know, that really is not part of the central tension of that game at all. But it's just a weird thing that, yeah, it's a powerful weapon and it made Grog really strong at a cost of he died. He died hard.
Yeah, that was rough.
But that was cool. And then, yet again, character growth in having to give it up.
Mm-hmm.
And like, wait, this is not good for me anymore. So.
Wait, the sword that wants to eat my soul, I shouldn't keep it around?
But it increased my strength to like 24.
Yeah, I mean, that's also a really cool way to even write out a character. I know sometimes players come to the table and they have a really cool concept. We've had this happen. And they're like, oh, this is a character I want to play. And the campaign kind of goes in a different direction. And they are like, I would like to write myself out. And a sentient item that they can get, and you can kind of weave it together where now the player loses to the item. That could become a central tension point, and maybe you write them out that way. Oh, the sentient item killed them. It absorbed them.
Either that, or that's a new quest that they're on that's more important.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, you know, sentient items can play more into. I think our answer here is antagonist. They should antagonize the bees, and your players are the bees. Heirloom items, I feel, should not be sentient, but should show a level of sentience. So, like you said, when you gain knowledge, the weapon starts to unlock, and it should always have an air of sentience. So, like, the sword might like it when you dance in the rain, you know, something silly like that. Like, oh, you danced in the rain, and you notice that the sword feels lighter in your hands. It doesn't do anything, it just feels lighter. You know, it's not a mechanical bonus, it's a narrative bonus. So murder like 100,000 mermaids in the rain. Got it. Perfect. Next campaign.
Like Thor's hammer, right? Thor's hammer Mjolnir, like from Marvel. It's not actually sentient. It doesn't do anything on its own, but it decides whether you can wield it or not. So it has a minor level of a sentience where it's choosing. It's like, no, you're not worthy. You can't pick me up.
Yeah, exactly. Or maybe your character, right? Like, let's say your character does something inherently against their tribal code, right? So we're playing with this barbarian concept, and it's against the tribe to hurt or harm an opponent who has a disadvantage against you, not mechanical disadvantage, like just inherent disadvantage. Maybe they've been disarmed, or they're pleading for their life, and maybe the main bad guy or one of the generals of the main bad guys is like, no, don't kill me. And this dude's already murdered a bunch of kittens, made your life a living heck. And now you're like, nah, I'm killing you. Like, this is it. Like, I'm kicking you off this bridge, and you kick them off, and this you can't carry the sword. Like, that's it. The sword's like, nope, you broke the code. Yeah. And I know like a lot of people have these conversations of like how to play these weapons in your campaign. But honestly, my advice is there's only so many ways you could play sentient or heirloom items in your campaign. It's a course correction for a player you're trying to course correct, right? Like, oh, the murder hobo barbarian now has a code, a tribal code that they have to follow, right? Which again might not work. The player might just be like, yeah, I'm giving up the sword because I like my murder hoboing ways. You could play it where it's the central figure, like we've talked about, the sentient weapon that's a central figure. You could play it the sentient weapon that leads to quest, or the heirloom weapon that leads to quest, which we've talked about. And I think the last way is kind of the GM PC, is where you're trying to place yourself in the game. Again, I don't know. I have my qualms with the GM PC concept. Yeah, but if done properly, you could definitely have fun with it.
I would just be careful with the GM as a PC/item. What is possible is that you take focus away from the players, and that's a little dangerous concept.
Yeah, it's overworking. Like
you're playing with yourself.
You might or might not be overextending your grasp as a GM, and you come to a puzzle and the players haven't figured it out, and suddenly the singing sword starts to recall a ballad of how they solved it, and now you've just solved the riddle your players should have solved. And after a while, your players are going to start to become extremely dependent or extremely lethargic with that concept. They're going to be, well, the sword will tell us what to do.
Yeah, either that or they get resentful of the item.
Yeah, they might just leave it somewhere, right? Like, this is an item. You could just put it down. Be like, I don't want this anymore. No more. I'm good.
And not even that, but you have your players resenting the idea that the item even exists. And because it's like, the players are basically the superheroes of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just saying, oh, well, you can't do it. This item does it. And you're like, okay, why am I around if the item can do it? I just carry the item and just do nothing. It's not fun.
Yeah, you just kind of walk into the room. You're like, take care of this item. Do it. Do the thing. And again, that's what we want to avoid here. We want to have you, the GM, place these items into your campaign as fun concepts. We want you to take them, put them in, and say, oh, this is an heirloom item or a legacy item, and it's going to increase in power through Lorne study. The item has a dragon soul in it, and it's greedy. It's a red dragon, and the sword wants gold. Oh, give me all the gold. I mean, that's a great item to put in. It's just wants gold. The more gold the player has, the better the sword is.
And don't ever be concerned with, now, if you make an item too powerful or not powerful enough, you can always adjust it later. But if you're trying to make an item that you're kind of dropping in for your players and the players really didn't work with you on it, and you're just trying to throw either an intelligent item or one of these heirloom legacy items in the game, and the players kind of ignore it, that's fine. So long as it's not like the central tension, that's perfectly fine for them to go, either they never see it or they see it and go, maybe they couldn't make the checks, or no one really lines up with that. Maybe you thought a player was going to really match up with it, and they were like, well, I like my other stuff. That's always okay.
100%. Steve is 100% right with that. So, Steve, I think you kind of hit on an amazing point there. You know, as long as this item isn't the main focal point, and if it is, it should have been brought in starting session 0. But if it's not the main focal point and your players don't attach themselves to these sentient or heirloom items, don't really worry about it. you'll always have a chance to bring in another item or another really cool idea. And as always, we are Nothing Ventured, Nothing Game, giving advice, rolling dice, a little bit of that New York spice. Have a great time.